Silver has been the best performing commodity of 2016, and in appreciation of our listeners, Palisade Radio and Palisade Research are giving away a free American Eagle 1-ounce silver round each and every week for the rest of the year. Just visit palisaderadio.com and enter your email for a chance to win.
Welcome back to another episode of Palisade Radio. This is your host, Colin Cattell, and back with me today is returning guest. Everybody knows who he is, Mr. Jeff Berwick, publisher of The Dollar Vigilante. Jeff, thanks for coming back on the program today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, Colin.
I see you've got yourself a new place there. The background's still the Bay of Acapulco, but it seems to be from a slightly different direction.
Yeah, I've been making so much money on Steemit.com. I upgraded my studio. I'm kind of joking on that, but I have been making a lot of money on Steemit. But yeah, I've moved to a different location, still in Acapulco with still the bay behind me. This is actually not Acapulco Bay. This is the bay next to it. And yeah, it's very nice here as always, as you know.
I've been seeing a lot of Steemit on your social media page. Many of our listeners have probably never heard of it, but it's in the realm of digital currency, which obviously has some overlap with the precious metals. Maybe just a brief touch on what you're doing with Steemit.
Sure, just briefly, it's a new blockchain-based social media site. So it's actually sort of a evolution or a really new idea on how to do social media. And it's all backed by a cryptocurrency called Steem. And you can actually get paid to post on the site. And I've been posting on that site. And because I have such a large following with cryptocurrency people and all sorts of people in the liberty movement and things like that, I've been making quite a bit posting on there. So if people out there, if you do post content, if you're a content creator, you should definitely look at steemit.com.
Yeah, I saw something about making $20,000 or $30,000 overnight on one of your posts, so congratulations on that, Jeff. The reason I wanted to get you on, I saw a big post you put out on the Dollar Vigilante talking about billionaires moving into gold. This is a theme we've been seeing for a couple months now, but really starting to build. And it seems like these smart money guys always know when to place their cash at the right time. Great sign for you and me and all of our listeners that are in the gold space.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. They seem to know exactly when to do these things, and I've learned to pay attention to them. Interestingly enough, you and I have both been into gold and precious metals and mining stocks for quite a while, and definitely in the last year, we both have been talking about how we think the new bull market has begun, and it definitely has, as we know. So we were in before them, but all in the last few months, they've all of a sudden been, like, I'm not saying every billionaire, but so many have just been moving massively into gold. It started with George Soros a few months ago. He started shorting the stock market, which actually I don't think worked out that well for him, so he might have been a little early on that one, but he invested heavily into gold and mining stocks, including Barrick, and did very well. And then there's been so many others who have come out just in the last month or so, including Stanley Druckenmiller. That's another billionaire. There's also actually a sort of an associate of Soros is a billionaire named Crispin Odey. He runs a hedge fund, and he just came out just recently, just in the last week or so, saying that he's incredibly gold bullish. Here's a quote from him. He says, "In a world where $13 trillion of bonds are negative yielding, where $4 trillion of investments are in ETFs, is it wise that only $1.5 trillion of savings are invested to protect investors against a change in the weather?" So he's gotten into it. And the most recent one, and this is one I'm just writing about right now, is the most evil one himself, Mr. Burns from Simpsons, Lord Jacob Rothschild. He's come out and said that central banks are getting so crazy that he's going to just start buying a ton of gold. Of course, he runs the central banks, so it's actually a bit of a scheme or a scam, as they always do. He's trying to say, oh, well, this thing's all going to collapse, and, it's not my fault, it's these crazy central bankers. And of course, he is the central banker of all central bankers. And so he's trying to say, oh, well, I'm going to buy gold now and try to make it look like he didn't cause what's about to happen, which is a massive crisis collapse in almost all paper assets, in my opinion. So we've seen all these people moving in, and now that we've seen Rothschild move in, I think it's fairly clear and safe to say that gold is going to do very well very soon, in my opinion. These people, as we pointed out, they know ahead of time, a lot of them, especially Soros and Rothschild. They're very elite sort of people, and they plan these things. These things never happen by accident. Just like 1929 didn't happen by accident, it was on purpose. That's all been proven now, that the central bank wanted to do that to create a massive crash. First to create a bubble, and then create a massive crash in order to buy up all the assets at pennies on the dollar, and that's probably what they're going to try to do again. So very, very interesting times for us who were in the precious metals.
Well, the numbers that you just pulled out reminds me of a fact that Rick Rules touted a couple times in our show, which is that the global allocation to metals based on the size of the U.S. economy was about 0.5% in January, as compared to an average of about 2.5 or 3%. And the high back in the late 70s, when gold spiked to those record highs at the time, was about 7 or 8% of money was in gold or gold-related assets. And what that is basically a factor of price. There's only so much gold, right, Jeff? So what that means is the gold price has to go significantly higher at this point, and more money is going to have to rush into the associated equities over the coming years for us to get anything back to a normal level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been one interesting thing is your average American has no idea about gold. They're not talking about gold on CNBC. They're definitely not talking about it on CNN. And that's where many Americans still, even though mass media is massively going down, they still get a lot of their information from those places. And it's not real information. It's propaganda. It's done on purpose. So we've seen, as you pointed out, I think in the 1970s, I think about 5% of an average American's portfolio were somehow invested in gold or gold-related items. And then it was like 3% in the 80s. And it's just been going down ever since. And you just pointed out it's around 0.5% now. So they've gotten everyone out of it right at the time they should all be in it, which is what they always do. They try to just screw as many people as possible and try to get as much money for themselves as possible. So it's really interesting. There's even Mark Dice who does his videos, and he was trying to give out, he was on the street in California and trying to offer people, they could either take a Hershey's chocolate bar or a 10-ounce bar of silver, and no one took the 10-ounce bar of silver. Everyone took the chocolate bar. So people have no idea. The mainstream media is never going to tell you. The movies, the news, the television programming, it's called programming for a reason. So most people have no idea. And in my opinion, this is it could be a massive, probably be by far the biggest gold bull market in history by far, because at the end of it, I expect all fiat currencies to collapse. That's how dire the situation is. And you can see the elites talking about it now. So they're trying to prime the pump, so to speak, trying to just sort of let people know out there that, so when it all happens, they could go, oh, we tried to warn you, and then no one listened. and it's the same old story, but for smart people. And even if you just look at gold, you know, of course, gold and silver have had an excellent year so far. They started going up on the very first day of January, which is really interesting that happened, and it has not looked back since. But it's still only gold at around $1,300, silver at around $20. These are well off their highs of just a few years ago. So this is still an excellent time for people to be getting some insurance, like many of these billionaires say they are doing.
Yeah, and further to that point, thinking about the numbers, gold at 1,300, not terribly far off its high, percentage-wise about 30 or 40%, and yet globally, like we were just speaking, only being 0.5 to 0.75%, just goes to show how high all other asset prices are, the stock market, real estate, things that have been bid up by Fed printing, Fed policy. And you put out a very popular video last year around the idea of the Shemitah, and you predicted some tumultuous times in the year ahead. One thing that I expected, I think you expected, was for this economy in the U.S. to come off, and yet it's continued to climb higher with no end in sight. Have you given any more thought, Jeff, to when we could see the stock market come crashing apart?
Well, we should definitely explain the difference between the economy and the stock market. They're two totally separate things, and they're completely unrelated at this moment in time. The U.S. economy is terrible. If you look at your average American, they've never been in worse shape since at least the 1970s. That's why there's all these minimum wage debates and all these sort of things. And because of all the money printing, a lot of that money has actually gone into the stock market, especially with interest rates at 0%, which is actually incentivizing people not to save, which actually destroys capital and destroys actually the entire world and the economy over time, and they've now been doing that for 8 years. But a lot of this money has gone into the stock market, and so we're seeing new nominal all-time highs. It's definitely not all-time highs. If you actually look at the Dow Jones versus gold over the last 100 years, the Dow Jones is down massively since the year 2000. It's absolutely massive how much it's down. But because it's in nominal dollars, and they keep printing dollars with all their quantitative easing and money printing at the Federal Reserve and other central banks, We've seen the stock markets look like they're doing okay, but they're really not. We're seeing all kinds of people. I saw even Barron's magazine, which is usually quite bullish on everything, questioning how it's possible that stocks keep going up when their earnings aren't going up, they're actually going down. When the economy is actually terrible, if you look at the real numbers, not the government numbers, it's actually just a bubble of money printing. So it's definitely going to collapse at some point, unless they print so much money, and this is possible, unless they continue to print so much money that we could actually see the Dow go to 50,000, but at that point, a Big Mac at McDonald's will cost about $50. So that's where we're headed. That's what's going on. We're either going to go into hyperinflation or a massive collapse that's never been seen in modern history. One or the other, and both are bad. And one of the only things that can really save you from either is gold.
Yeah, and I'm happy you ended that sentence with gold, because everything seems to point to gold right now. We were talking about this the last couple of years. Many of the same fundamental drivers that are now pushing gold were in place or in the making, and yet our thesis continually was wrong. And especially being in the mining stocks, you were losing significant capital. But if you stuck around into January and past, you've recovered, and you're probably up significantly. Does it make sense, aside from something like a digital currency, Jeff, to put your money into anything but gold right now? I can't think of very many things out there that are safe and certainly have the return that gold or gold stocks would have.
Well, we should point out nothing is really safe at this moment in time. I've called this the most dangerous time in human history for capital. Even gold might not be safe depending on how you store it and where you store it. Certainly if you're buying gold ETFs, which are just paper backed by banks, which might be close to bankruptcy. We're looking at Deutsche Bank right now. Looks like it could totally collapse. When those collapse, the ETFs will go under because they're actually backed by those banks. So it's a very dangerous time. There is no real safe place. And actually Richard Russell, who wrote the Dow Theory letters, who just died last year. He was sort of the start. He started the entire financial newsletter industry in the 50s, I believe. He said a couple of years ago, he says, whoever loses the least in this next crash is going to win. That's essentially what's going to happen. Now, of course, some people will make a fortune, but very few will. And one of the things that I definitely recommend is, for example, gold and silver, that's just obvious, but how and where you hold the bullion is going to be very important. Of course, in the land of the free, as they call it, I call it the land of the fee, in the U.S. in 1933, they confiscated gold from all American citizens for 40 years. A lot of people don't remember that because they don't get told that or taught that in their government indoctrination camps for 12 years. So a lot of people forgot all about that. So that could happen again. I'm not expecting them to confiscate this time, although it's definitely possible. And there's so many other countries, especially Europe, that are in such dire straits, you could see anything happen. So you have to be very careful how you hold your gold and silver. With the mining stocks, my opinion is that if the financial market and the monetary system can stay alive a few more years, which is possible, then we could see a bull market in the gold mining stocks unlike anything we've ever seen. And we've seen massive ones in the past that have made thousands or tens of thousands of percent for some people. So that's my speculative angle, is to have some money in those stocks. But when it comes to safety, it's definitely more bullion. I'd also look at real estate and hard assets, farmland, for example. People are still going to have to eat after all this collapses. I definitely would look outside of places like the U.S. Because of just what's going on there, and I think it's going to be ground zero for the coming collapse. But places like Latin America, farmland, we've talked about that in our newsletter, The Dollar Vigilante. We found a few really interesting farmland investment opportunities in Panama. I'm looking at one in Colombia right now, and I know you were just in Colombia. So many things going on in Colombia that are really great. So we're looking at those sort of things, and then of course there's the cryptocurrencies, but you really have to know what you're doing. It's going to take a lot of people quite a bit of time to figure out what's going on in that space. But our subscribers at the Dollar Vigilante, we've been telling them all about it since 2011 when Bitcoin was at $3 and it's currently at $500. So those are the things that we've been telling people to definitely be looking at and to be moving towards. And if for someone out there, if you've got most of your assets in a bank account in the US or Canada or Europe, and if it's in Europe, turn off this video right now and go take it out of the bank right now before it closes. It might be too late by the time I'm done talking here. I'm serious about that. That they should be definitely looking to get some of their assets out. And for people who hold things like IRAs and things like that, and have assets in there, I'd be looking to get those out of those IRAs as soon as possible. If you can't get them out, move them into a self-directed IRA. And once you're in self-directed, you can invest in almost anything, including gold bullion. And you can also take it outside of the U.S., for example, which I would recommend having a significant portion of your assets outside of the country in which you live, because as these governments all collapse, they're all going to try to take as much from their tax slaves, or what, as they call them, citizens, as possible.
You have a fantastic analyst, Ed Bugos. We've been trying to get him on the program. He's just been so swamped with all the great research that he's putting out, but I'm sure we'll set that up here soon. Ed's been kind of spot on since the beginning of the year, calling different places to put capital and what to look at, and strategies in place on just how to invest in the mining stocks. I know that part of this is a conversation to be left between myself and Ed, but maybe just a little bit more on the mining stocks. You've been in the field a couple cycles now. You were the head of the largest financial website in Canada, which is focused around these mining stocks at times. So, Jeff, what do you think about the next few years ahead for mining stocks?
Yeah, as you pointed out, I started stockhouse.com, which is the largest financial website in Canada, in 1994. And so I was around during that 94, 95, 96 bull with Bre-X and Diamond Fields. And that really got me interested in the whole market. I just found it fascinating. I found it fascinating how you could buy something for a few pennies and it could be a few $100s within like 6 months. That's the mining exploration market. It was fascinating. Of course, you have to know what you're doing. And that's why people like you, Colin, and people like Ed Bugos, or, people who really know this stuff is who you need to be listening to if you're going to invest in them, because it's not easy at all. But if you listen to the right people and it's the right timing, you can make absolute fortunes. So that's where we're at with the mining stocks. Ed Bugos, his portfolio is up 200% in the last year. So he's done very well. He's called so many things right. He's truly a genius. And that's actually why it's hard to get him on these programs. I try to get him on your show and others, but he's just buried in spreadsheets and calculations. He's sort of like one of those sort of crazy genius sort of guys. But he's really good. So I tell him, okay, if you're too busy, don't worry about it, because we need you to make us and our subscribers a lot of money. So keep doing what you're doing. But that's what he's been doing for the last year, and he's still incredibly bullish on both the precious metals and the mining stocks. He thinks, I think, like you, Colin, that this is just the first or second inning of a 9-inning game. Of course, there could be a pullback. We've had the gold stocks done very well over the last 6 months. There could be some sort of pullback, but I know Ed's not expecting a major pullback. It'll probably be minor in his opinion. As far as the precious metals, I would not be trading in and out of them too much, because I consider them to be one of the only things that can really be your safety if they close the banks, if they close down everything, which is totally possible. We're getting that close to it, especially in Europe. And if Deutsche Bank collapses, as one example, in 2008, it was Lehman Brothers that set off the whole crisis. Deutsche Bank is much, much bigger than Lehman Brothers, and much more interconnected with all the financial system around the world. So if it goes down, and it's looking like it's very close at this moment in time, their stock's down more than 50% in the last year. Their profits were down 99% year over year this year. They're just laying off people and closing things as quickly as possible. If that goes down, we could see a financial crisis unlike anything we've ever seen, way bigger than 2008. So at that moment in time, you don't want to be have sold a lot of your gold just to find out that all of a sudden everything just gets shut down, and all of a sudden gold's worth $5,000 an ounce, and you would just trade it out of it because you were worried it was going to go down $50 or $100. So I suggest to people to hold gold and silvers solidly and not to be trading them unless you want to trade extra on top of that. But you should definitely have a significant portion of your assets in them just for safety at this moment in time. And then for this, on the upside part, I see the mining stocks as playing that role. The mining stocks are the ones that can go from 10 cents to $10 in a few months, given the right situation and the right scenario. So I look at the metals as more for safety, and I look at the mining stocks as more for speculative upside.
Very good. Well, there's a YouTube channel I'm sure you've heard of. It's called Vice and Vice News. And I think that a lot of their views are a little bit strongly to the left. But they've put some really good pieces of journalism together. The reason I bring that up is I watched a fantastic documentary last night. It was part of their HBO series, and it was about fighting ISIS in Iraq. And it did a beautiful job of dissecting how we took a country that was obviously under horrible dictator rule, but was stable. And Iraq is really an area that kind of is at the middle of many different sects of Islam in the Middle East. And we went in there, and the U.S., of course, with coalition forces, and kind of just ripped the place apart and created a breeding ground for ISIS and the Shiites, which is backed by Iran, which is almost as bad as ISIS. And we've got basically a civil war between 4 different groups going on there. I guess my takeaway from the documentary was once you do something like that, there's no going back. People are talking about attacking further or pulling out. It's kind of beyond repair at this point. That leads me to 2 potential presidential candidates, Jeff, that you don't like either of, and I don't particularly either. But Hillary would seem to usher in a similar policy as Obama and Bush, which is certainly on the police the world. Whereas Trump is a bit of an unknown. I wouldn't expect him to change things too much, but maybe something different, which is, I guess, a little bit of excitement. What are you seeing on the presidential front, aside from hating both candidates, Jeff?
Well, I hate all candidates all the time because I don't like government. I think government is an unnecessary evil, and because of that, I don't support any of them. The only closest I've ever come is Ron Paul, because he essentially wanted to shut it down for the most part, and that's what I think should be done as well. And so when it comes to this election, I've actually picked for over a year now. I said Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the U.S. It's because it isn't actually elections, it's actually selections. This has been going on since Kennedy, when they killed him, when he tried to stand up somewhat to the bankers, to the banksters, the financial elites, the people who control the money. And they took him out pretty quick. And after that, every president's pretty much fallen in line and done what they've wanted. And so they've essentially put in whoever they want, and it looks like it's going to be Hillary. That's my prediction. Of course, her health is interesting. We'll see if she makes it that long. Hopefully she doesn't. The sooner she's dead, the world's a better place by far. If she gets in, I'm not looking forward to the next few years. It's going to be war, poverty, destruction, absolute chaos. We're headed towards a lot of that already, just with how bad the financial monetary system is. But with her, she is a sociopathic, bloodthirsty killer. Her cackling when she had Muammar Gaddafi raped with a pipe and murdered and beaten to death in public. We saw, he died, cackling away. She is as evil as they get, and people just constantly dying around her. She takes out, and it's not just her, of course, she's got her handlers and all those sort of people, but anytime someone is going on their way to testify against her, they keep having accidents. The latest was a UN one where the guy was working out in his house and crushed his own windpipe with his dumbbell. That doesn't happen too often. Then Julian Assange's lawyer was just pushed in front of a train, or I guess they said she committed suicide or something. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. It's all fake. That's going to be brutal. Donald Trump is interesting. He's also very tied in with all these people. The Clintons and Trump are like best friends for decades. So this isn't really an election. It's a selection. If Trump does win, it will be interesting. I would say things would probably be a little better with Trump, but who knows? If he tried to really change anything, he'd be taken out very quickly. So people need to understand they live in a dictatorship. They live in a tyrannical dictatorship. It's not a democracy. You don't control anything. You are slaves, and people need to realize that and start to stand up and stop paying taxes and stop listening to the government and stop obeying their authority, and then we'll have peace and prosperity on earth like we've never known it. And if we don't, we're just going to keep entering into all these wars and economic destruction from the central banks and things like that. So obviously not very optimistic about what's going to happen, but it is going to be interesting. And of course, because of the difference between Trump and Clinton, I think that alone will really shake up the markets around October, and the markets already look ready to be shaken up. So it could be a very, very interesting fall. And you brought up earlier, I talk about the Shemitah and Jubilee year. The Jubilee year ends on October 2nd. On October 1st is when the Chinese yuan is being put into the IMF's SDR basket. Very interesting. It's being put in over a weekend, which is usually when they do these things, which could end up closing down banks. So I'm definitely expecting a wild and crazy fall period here, and if people don't own precious metals and other of the assets that we mentioned before, and they have most of their money in bank accounts and in mutual funds, in the stock market, in money market funds, I would be really running now, not walking, to start to get some of those assets put into other outside of the financial system, because this is going to be a crazy fall period. And then after that, it's just going to get crazier and crazier, in my opinion. So get ready now before the crowd. As you pointed out, Colin, most people have no idea about precious metals right now. They're going to want to know a lot about them in the next few months as everything starts to collapse. And by then, I actually think, and I've said this before, that very quickly it will be very hard to buy precious metals, gold and silver. Even in the last year here in Mexico, where they are the largest producer of silver in the world, I couldn't find any silver coins for sale for about a month. I even contacted Hugo Salinas Price, who's a neighbor of mine here, who's a billionaire Mexican who runs Azteca Bank, and he was like, yeah, no, we can't get any either. There's no silver to be bought. And that was before any sort of crisis. You can imagine what will happen after.
Well, not an optimistic picture that you're painting, or myself, but it's good to be in the right spot, which is, of course, precious metals over the next few years. If things go badly globally, which I can't see them not, you want to be positioned to capitalize off of that and protect yourself and make money. Before we go here, I just want to remind all of our listeners that we're doing the silver giveaway for the rest of the year. We're giving away 1 silver ounce each and every week, an American Eagle silver ounce. And you just go to palisaderadio.com and put your email in. This week's winner is Jason out of Ontario. I want to pass the mic over to you, Jeff. You've got some announcements on your conference coming up, and, of course, where listeners can find out all of your work.
Yeah, as you know, Colin, I have a conference every year in Acapulco called Anarchapulco. It's the world's largest anarcho-capitalist conference. This coming up in 2017 in February will be our third conference, and it looks like it's going to be absolutely massive. Might be around 1,000 people from around the world. It's going to be incredibly exciting. And the day before Anarchapulco, we have our Dollar Vigilante Summit. It's called our Internationalization and Investment Summit. By the time you put this up live, we might not have it up on our site yet, but sometime soon, in the next few days, we will have it up on Anarchapulco.com. Just go to anarchapulco.com and you'll find it there. And it's going to be on February 24th of 2017 here in Acapulco, Mexico. And Colin, you'll be coming down or up, depending on where you are, to speak. And we also have, of course, Ed Bugos. We're also going to have David Morgan, one of the most famous silver investors and analysts. So that's going to be excellent. I think you've had him on your show, I'm sure. Bill Murphy of GATA is going to be here. We have Roger Ver, one of the top, if not the top person in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. He's also known as the Bitcoin Jesus. Chris Casey of Windrock Wealth Management. Ben Johnson of First Northwest Securities, which is he's one of the most well-known sort of brokers and investors and in the mining markets. So he's going to be here as well. And there might be many others to be announced. So that's going to be February 24th. Just check out anarchapulco.com. And if you don't see it there when you check back in a few days or in a week, and we'll probably have that information up then. And it's going to be an excellent conference. We did it last year, and it was excellent. I know you couldn't make it last year. You're with your grandpa in Argentina or something, if I remember correctly. But looking forward to seeing you here again next year, Colin.
Can't wait for it. It's going to be a great conference. Jeff, thank you so much for coming back on the show, and we'll get you back on soon, as always.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Think you understand the junior mining sector, and you think that the participants in the mining sector, junior mining sector, are good people and kind people, hit the bid.
And the world is always going to need raw materials. It's going to need copper and gold and nickel and so forth.
Totally destabilized. Hey, troll, did you hear what's going on in Yemen? Or are you too stupid?